The brain consists of 98% of central nervous system and 2% is contained by the spinal cord. We will be studying about the structure of the brain in brief along with some of its parts. The entire structure of brain consists of the cerebral cortex, the mesencephalon, which is the midbrain part, corpus callosum, which helps in coordination of the left as well as the right hemisphere of the brain. Since this part, which is shown in the diagram, is one half of the brain, so think about your brain being cut into two equal halves from your nose side. At that time, it is containing half of the part which is shown in the diagram. Corpus callosum helps in coordination of both the left and right hemisphere together. Diencephalon is the part which is labeled in, which is this part labeled over here. Yes. And cerebellum is the part which is helpful in coordination of the entire body's muscular functions or the body's voluntary functions. Medulla oblongata is known as the brainstem and it is formed with the help of pons. So, this is a brief structural description about the brain. The brain consists of outer coverings as well. So, what does the outer covering means? It means that this is one covering. It will be continuing till the spinal cord. Second covering, and one more covering is there. So this is how the brain is formed, or these are the outer coverings of the brain. Let's see what are those coverings. The entire cranium. Now, what is cranium? Cranium is the brain case or the skull part, which is made up of eight number of flat bones, which are joined together to form the outer tough covering, which protects the inner delicate structure of the brain. The weight of the brain is 1.2 to 1.4 kgs, and it has the outer coverings as dura mater, pia mater, and arachnoid. The in case of mammals, the pia mater is the inner thin vascular structure which lies close to the brain, and since it is vascular, so large number of blood vessels are present in it. Arachnoid is present after it, or you can say it is the middle thin vascular layer, and it is form of reticular connective tissue. The dura mater is the outermost covering which is in contact with the skull part or the cranium part. It is thicker and fibrous and it lies along the inner side of the cranium. Now just below of dura mater and above the arachnoid membrane, there is this subarachnoid space which is filled with cerebrospinal fluid. This is very important. Cerebrospinal fluid. What is the function of this cerebrospinal fluid? This fluid is watery, lymph like fluid which is capable of protecting the inner brain, and it helps in maintenance of constant pressure in the brain. Along with it, it also avoids any kind of mechanical shock if our body gets. Sometimes we fall off, we fall down, and at that time there is a very high jerk. If that jerk our brain gets, then it will get damaged. So in order to avoid that, there is presence of this fluid. Next, we will discuss in details about the forebrain. The forebrain is also known as prosencephalon, and it consists of the olfactory lobes, the cerebrum, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, all these parts are included in it. It is the site for memory, intelligence, consciousness, and voluntary activity in an individual. It consists of the left as well as the right hemisphere of the brain. The corpus callosum is the adjoining link, and it connects the neurons from both the hemispheres together. Each hemisphere has outer cortex and inner medulla. Our cerebral cortex consists of gray matter and white matter. The gray matter is formed of cell bodies and non medullated nerve fibers. There is no presence of myelination in this gray matter part. Whereas the white part or white matter is formed of medullated nerve fibers. It means myelin sheath is present, and this white matter, it contains the axons of the neurons. So it is very important that you understand that the gray matter is containing the cell bodies, whereas the white matter is containing the axon of the neurons. The cerebrum has ridges, and these ridges are known as gyri, and depressions are also there, which are known as the sulci. So the structure is somewhat like this. This part, which is moving outside or which is like a mountain top, is the gyri, whereas the depression part is known as the sulci. The reason why these structures are present is just in order to increase the surface area of the brain, so that there can be accommodation of large number of neurons, because there is a requirement of large number of neurons for coordination of the body. All the body functions, they all are controlled by our brain, so there must be presence of lot of neuron centers or neuron endings as well as the axons for the coordination. So that's why it is necessary that the surface area is quite higher, so that it can accommodate all these neurons within itself. The next part is the diencephalon part, which consists of the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, the thalamus, as well as the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is uh, is formed of a pair of mass of neurons, and it controls the involuntary functions like the hunger, thirst, sweating, blood pressure, anger, fear. Most of these functions are controlled by the hypothalamus part. What about the thalamus part? It is the relay center for the muscular activity. For example, they receive the thalamus, it receives the nerve impulses of pain, temperature, touch, and coordinates and integrates the brain to function properly in the same way. The pituitary gland is the master gland and is the control center of the entire endocrine system. Pineal gland is actually not active in case of the larger animals like us, but it is active in lower organisms like the birds and all, over where it controls the activity of flight. For example, the migratory birds, they use their this pineal gland for the migratory zeal that is developed in them with the help of these pineal glands. The mesencephalon is also known as the midbrain part, and it controls the optic lobes and the auditory lobes. So, the vision as well as the hearing sensation or auditory reflex is controlled with the help of the midbrain part. The hindbrain part is the one which has the presence of cerebellum, pons, and medulla oblongata. The function of pons is to coordinate the muscles of both sides of the body, like the left as well as the right side of our body. Whereas cerebellum is the center which controls the voluntary movements in us, and it also controls the equilibrium and posture, the maintenance of the straight erect posture while we are standing, walking, or sleeping, that is maintained with the help of cerebellum. Similarly, in case of the people or the individuals who are drunk, they cannot coordinate their body because the neurons in the cerebellum, they are not well coordinated because of release of high amount of neurotransmitters. Now, what are neurotransmitters again? Neurotransmitters are chemicals which are released by the cells or the neurons axon terminals, because the coordination between one neuron and another neuron can only be done with the help of not continuous electron impulses. There should be some chemical transformation which must occur from one neuron to another, and when there is a vacant space in which the electrical impulse has to travel, it is not possible for the electrical impulse to travel in a vacant space or in a vacuum. So during that time there is use of this neurotransmitter. One of the common example of neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. One marks question is always asked regarding this: name a neurotransmitter, or what is the function of neurotransmitters. So this is something which you should learn. Cerebellum also helps in controlling rapid muscular activities like running, typing, talking, and that's why it's a very important part. Medulla oblongata is the brainstem, or it is the part which leads towards the vertebral column. Yeah, it leads towards the vertebral column. So this medulla oblongata is the main site for control of all the involuntary activities like sneezing, respiratory activity, or salivation, vomiting, urination, swallowing. All these activities, they all are controlled by the medulla oblongata. If someone is hit in the brainstem, so in the neck portion, then it gets broken down, and if it is broken, then the individual tends to die immediately. So immediate death of an individual can occur if the dislocation of the medulla oblongata takes place. This is a common case of death during the accidents. Whenever anyone encounters a bike accident and they fall off, this coordination between the medulla oblongata and the spinal cord is broken down, and that's why the individual, they die. There are various important parts, and we should learn the activities, what or the functions of these parts. Medulla oblongata, it controls the vasomotor centers like the respiration, cardiac function, vasodilation, vomiting, coughing, sneezing, and swallowing. Cerebrum, it controls the voluntary motor actions like tactile and sensory motions and auditory perceptions. Cerebellum is responsible for balance and stability in an individual. Even it is responsible for coordination of movement, and sometimes learning and intelligence or understanding in an individual is done by the cerebellum. Understanding of the situation, how to act in a particular situation, is controlled by it. Thalamus is the relay station for sensory stimulation, and it receives the neuronal reflexes or neuronal signals for both the effector as well as the sensory neurons. Hypothalamus is the regulation center for temperature, hormonal secretion, appetite, concentration of fluids, and storage of nutrients. Sometimes even emotions are controlled by the hypothalamus. Pons is a part of brainstem and is responsible for the regulation of sleep in the human beings and consciousness and sensory processes as well. This is the importance, very important part of central nervous system, that is the gray and white matter. The gray matter is formed of cell bodies and non-myelinated nerve fibers. In case of brain, it is present in the periphery. The gray matter is present in the periphery, whereas white matter is present in the center. It means the gray matter containing the cell bodies is present at the periphery, whereas white matter containing the axon, white matter containing the axon, gray matter containing the cell bodies, is distributed in such a way that axons are in the center in case of our brain, whereas the cell bodies are outside, so they can receive all the impulses at a very fast rate. Whereas in the spinal cord, it is reverse. Gray matter is in the center, whereas white matter is outside. So axons are at outside, whereas the cell bodies are inside. Now, why is it so? It is arranged in such a way because the quick actions in our body, it is all taken up by the, or the response is given up by the spinal cord. So our spinal cord is capable of giving quick responses. That's why the cell bodies are present in the center, so perception is taking place in the center, and axon terminals are at the corners or at the periphery, so that very quick re- reception or the effector muscle activity or motor neurons activity can be done. Whereas in the case of brain, the axons are present in the center. So the activities which are done by the brain, it is taking some time. It is little slow, but it is much more effective as compared to the activity done by the spinal cord. It is not a reflex action which is done by the center of the brain or the gray matter in the brain. Whereas in the spinal cord, it is little quick action. So, this is regarding the brain and the spinal cord activities, and I hope you all have understood it quite well.